Hundreds of thousands of eligible people in Massachusetts have yet to register to vote. The state legislature is considering a bill to change that with a form of automatic registration proposed by the New Democracy Coalition. We'd like to welcome the coalition's executive director, Kevin Peterson. Thank you very much for being with us, Kevin.
Thanks for inviting me here.
Kevin, so what's going on with this eligibility gap? Are these hundreds of thousands? Maybe if you look at the country, what's happening? How do you account for this?
In the country, Chris, there's a 50 million person eligibility gap, meaning that there are 50 million people across the whole United States who could be registered today if we use the current technology to register them. In Massachusetts, where there are more than about 6 million people, there is a 700,000 eligibility gap. Folks who, again, are eligible to vote, who are 18, who are residents, who are members of this country. They're ready to vote. The technology is there to register them to vote. We're just saying that we should use what technology we have to ensure that there's an even playing field in terms of voter eligibility and voter registration.
And I imagine a good portion of this is actually people who've been voting quite a number of years, and they move, and all of a sudden the next election turns up and they find out they're not registered.
Right. Particularly within urban communities where residents move often. They're citizens, they're eligible, they move from Roxbury to Dorchester, and on election day they realize that in Dorchester they can't vote at the local polling station, and they may have to go to the Roxbury polling station, which at that point would be illegal. So this bill would allow citizens to carry their voter registration status with them. It's mobile. So if they moved from Roxbury to Dorchester, fairly soon after they've moved, they will be captured as a person who's moved, eligible voter who's moved into another neighborhood, and very soon after that they'll be registered to vote, or their voter registration status would move from one area of the city to another.
Of course, another thing you're trying to do here is get people voting early and more often, starting from high school. How is that supposed to fit in?
Well, this piece of legislation would capture any eligible voter, any citizen who's turning 18, from 17 to 18, while they're in high school, more than likely, and register them. A letter will be sent to where that student at that point, where he or she lives, and that student would have the opportunity, as everyone would the opportunity to opt out. So if they didn't want to be a registered voter, they could indicate to the Secretary of State that they don't want to be a voter and send back the form and not be a voter. But if they wanted to be a voter, they don't have to do anything. There's no fault. And during their first election opportunity for these 18-year-olds, they would at that point at the polls identify their party status, their party affiliation. So if they wanted to be a Republican, they can check the box at the polling station to be a Republican. If they wanted to be a Democrat, they can check that box. So the process, the bill calls for a fairly seamless process. We already have the databases. The Secretary of State has a database. The DMV has a database. Military branches have databases. Our municipalities, some of the larger ones, have databases. So we have the information, and we have the computing capacity. We just need to pull these databases, use this computing capacity, and create a statewide, secure voter base for automatic voter registration.
Now, I guess there are ways to safeguard against errors, because you might have someone who, is a resident in good standing, they pay taxes, they work hard, but they're not a citizen yet. Let's say they want to be naturalized, but I guess there's a way to sift that out through these databases.
Sure. I mean, one of the databases would be the Federal Naturalization Office, which identifies who's a citizen, who's not a citizen, based on the process that immigrant went through. So that information would be filtered into the database, and you would be able to identify which voter last year became a citizen and make that citizen a new voter permanently, automatically.
What about the fear that we see around the country right now? And maybe it's more from one party than another. All these states that are taking measures to guard against fraud and ID. It seems kind of strange that you're going against that trend here with trying to get more people registered.
Because that's the ultimate end, the ultimate objective of our democracy is to ensure that there is absolute inclusion, that there is universal engagement in terms of the voting process. The barriers that some folks are putting up, to me, is nonsense. We should be looking for every opportunity to invite people, eligible voters, citizens, into the process. And this is what this legislation does.
You've worked on a lot of campaigns in Boston over the years, and I think you've certainly heard about cases, things at the polls, where people would go and they would get frustrated, and you know, they're really just trying to vote, and they're dealing with people who have to enforce rules, and then they ended up not being able to vote.
Yeah, and what could be better, or what could be better than to have a secure voter registration database that identifies right off the bat. It's in the computer. There are no pages to flip through, so to speak. These databases could be, the polling workers could be using an iPad that's connected to a larger mainframe, where that information is secure and voters can be identified. The law also captures people who are not registered, who are not captured in the process. That person comes to the polls on election day, that person could be registered. So it's a form of same-day voter registration that connects that unregistered voter to that new address. Another thing I wanted to add, the misnomer that some have around the voting process needing to be tough or arduous in order to show their patriotism, in order for them to appreciate the right to vote. I understand that, but I think that shouldn't be the standard around why or how we register voters, not by how difficult it could be so that people will appreciate it. I think the ultimate end of our democracy and civic engagement in terms of voting should be making the process easier for people to engage.
Well, confusion is also an issue, because one thing that I've read about some of the states that have adopted these so-called anti-fraud measures is that a lot of people didn't go out to vote because they thought they didn't have the ID that was required, and it turned out that they did have it.
Yeah, and so Massachusetts is not one of those states where there is a strict voter ID, but that goes to the larger point around universal voter registration across the country. Currently, about 15% of the country is now covered under automatic voter registration. Had New Jersey passed had Governor Christie not vetoed the bill, 20% of the country would be under voter registration. Eric Holder next year, the former Attorney General, next month, will be calling for universal voter registration across the country. So it's a tool that's needed. And I think that if we implemented our democracy, would be better off. We got to do additional work around protecting the vote on election day to make sure that folks aren't intimidated at polls or anything like that. And we have to do a great deal of work around voter education, civic literacy, getting people to understand what the process is about, what issues are on the ballot, why they're voting, discerning what the candidates are talking about. For instance, Trump versus Clinton. That's important work also. But this automatic voter registration bill is a tool that we need, and I think that it should be approved in Massachusetts.
What about the cost of this? You're putting more people on the rolls and you're using technology. Some people can say, isn't that going to cost somebody money, whether it's the state or some of the local communities?
No, long run is cheaper. A study in Delaware indicated that the voter registration using the paper card process and the processing activity effort by people costs 83% per person. Using electronic voter registration and processing electronically costs 3 cents per person. So in the long run, Massachusetts, in the very short run, Massachusetts would be saving money the taxpayers would be saving money and not spending money on voter registration cards in multiple languages and using the bodies that are needed to input data. We'll be saving money instead of losing money, and we'll be ensuring that our database is secure and safe and less secure and safe.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kevin
Appreciate it.
Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition.